It was supposed to be a standard late-night chat, an easy exchange under bright studio lights. Instead, it devolved into a public reckoning as a legendary actor found himself cornered by a host seemingly bent on ridicule. Tonight, we delve into the volatile on-air clash that led Christopher Walken to abandon the set of the Donis show, leaving a stunned audience and a floundering host scrambling to regain control. This wasn't merely a celebrity storming off stage. It was a striking example of how swiftly decorum can unravel when respect is cast aside. Before we unravel this extraordinary episode, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe ignited this combustible exchange? Backstage at the Donis show, the atmosphere was unusually hushed. Christopher Walken, seated in a low-backed armchair, moved through his quiet pre-show routine with practiced grace, consulting an old-fashioned pocket watch, smoothing the lines of his signature charcoal suit. At 78, Walken was no stranger to interviews, yet something about this night felt askew. The producers had offered little clarity about the direction the conversation would take, vaguely suggesting a focus on some of his more unconventional artistic decisions. Walken had always approached public appearances with caution, choosing to let his performances speak rather than participate in the self-congratulatory machinery of Hollywood. Yet his latest film release had the studio pushing aggressively for exposure, and Heart's show, syndicated nationally from Vancouver, was considered a crucial stop for any serious publicity run. Walken had reluctantly agreed, under the assurance that the dialogue would center on his work and forthcoming roles. As the theme music cued, Walken stepped onto the set, greeting the crowd's enthusiastic applause with a measured nod. Hart approached with his trademark bounce, but there was a brittleness in his cheer that immediately raised Walken's guard. The host's smile felt artificial, bordering on wolfish, and his handshake clung just a shade too long. "Ladies and gentlemen, give a warm welcome to the inimitable Christopher Walken," Hart declared, arms thrown wide. "Christopher, it's such a pleasure. And I have to say, you look exactly as I imagined." Walken took his seat, upright and composed. "Appreciate the invitation, Robert, though I'm curious what you mean by that." Hart chuckled, though there was a sharpness to it, a trace of glee in an inside joke he hadn't shared. "Well, you've got that whole enigmatic, intense aura. It's very Walken-esque." "I'm simply here being myself," Walken replied steadily. "Nothing more." Sure, Hart said, nodding distractedly. "But listen, I've got to ask, and I think our audience is dying to know. Don't you get worn out by all the impressions? I mean, everyone thinks they can nail the Christopher Walken voice." The question didn't surprise Walken, but the tone caught him off balance. It wasn't curiosity, it was mockery, thinly veiled. "People have mimicked me for decades," he responded with care. "It's part of the territory. I've learned not to take it to heart. But some of them are downright savage, aren't they?" Hart pressed, clearly enjoying the discomfort. "I mean, Laugh Factory Nights has been skewering you for years. Doesn't it sting a little? Becoming a walking punchline." There was a visible shift among the audience. Murmurs quieting, bodies tensing. This wasn't the cheeky repartee they'd anticipated. Walken's face remained still, though a slight narrowing of the eyes betrayed his displeasure. "I don't view my work as a caricature," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I act. I invest myself in each role. If some find that amusing, that's their right." But Hart wasn't letting go. "Come on, Christopher. You have to admit, some of your choices have been downright bizarre. The dancing, the dramatic pauses, the staring contests with the camera. It's like you're always performing, even when you're off the clock." The statement landed like a gauntlet thrown at his feet. Walken regarded Hart closely, searching his expression for motive. In his long career, he had dealt with probing interviewers, but rarely had one seemed so intent on belittling him. "Authenticity isn't performance," Walken replied slowly. "Pretending to be something you're not, that's performance. I've only ever been myself." And still Hart persisted. "But that's the thing, isn't it? Who are you really? Watching your interviews, it's hard to distinguish between the man and the myth. It's like you never leave the stage." The room fell into a heavy silence, the playful energy thoroughly extinguished. Walkan's hands, once resting easily on the chair arms, now curled just slightly over the wood. "I'm not performing, Robert," he said, his tone dropping like a weight. "I came here for a conversation. But it seems like you're chasing something else entirely, something I never agreed to." Hart's expression cracked, just briefly revealing a flicker of something sharp beneath the charm. "No ulterior motive, Christopher. I just want to have a real, unfiltered conversation. But it's hard when you refuse to drop the mask." "What act?" Walkan asked, the famed calm in his voice beginning to fray. "I came here to speak about my craft, to discuss my films, to engage with your audience. Instead, I'm being paraded around like some kind of sideshow oddity." "Well, if we're being real," Hart replied, his voice rising with a hint of provocation, "you kind of are a sideshow, aren't you? I mean, people don't watch your movies expecting Shakespeare, they tune in to see what bizarre thing Christopher Walkan is going to do next." The remark landed with an almost surgical cruelty, slicing through the air so sharply that even the camera crew froze in silent disbelief. Walkan didn't move. He sat, perfectly composed, eyes forward, letting the words settle before speaking quietly but with the precision of a scalpel. "Robert," he began, voice low but edged in steel, "I've been an actor for more than half a century. I've collaborated with some of the most revered directors in cinematic history, William Holdy, Tim Burton, Martin Scorsese. They didn't cast me because I was a curiosity. They brought me into their work because I offer something real." Hart flicked his hand dismissively as if brushing lint off a coat. "Oh, come on, Christopher. They hired you because you're strange and unpredictable. You're like a novelty act that somehow crossed over into respectability. Let's not pretend this is about serious acting." The discomfort in the studio was now palpable. Audience members exchanged glances. A few leaned toward each other, whispering. Behind the cameras, the show's director gestured frantically for Hart to shift gears. He didn't. Or worse, he noticed and chose not to. "You want to know what I think the real issue is?" Walkan said, leaning forward slightly, voice still calm, but cold. "You didn't invite me here to have a conversation. You invited me to be mocked. You're trying to turn me into a punchline, live on air." "That's not true," Hart stammered, but the conviction had drained from his tone. "I just think it's amusing how seriously you take yourself. I mean, come on, you've made some very strange choices. The dancing videos, the obscure indie films, that whole cowbell thing from Sketchfire. It's kind of absurd, isn't it?" Walken's eyes narrowed, something flaring behind them. The cowbell sketch was comedy. I was playing a character. Participating in humor, not becoming it. That moment doesn't erase the work I've poured into a lifetime of acting. What's absurd is how easily you confuse me, the human being, with a dozen over-the-top impressions that have nothing to do with who I am. "Well, maybe there's no difference," Hart shot back, the fake grin returning, wider and more strained. "I've watched your interviews for years. The way you talk, it's always the same. Those odd pauses, the cryptic answers, the deadpan stare. It's all very calculated, don't you think? A performance in itself." "This is my voice," Walkan said flatly, now visibly tired of the bad faith jabs. "This is how I've always spoken. I'm sorry if my natural rhythm doesn't match your script for how a person should talk. But I won't contort myself into something more palatable just to ease your discomfort." Hart let out a hollow, mocking laugh. "Natural, right? Sure. Because people naturally speak like that, with weird emphases and long silences. It's all part of your brand, isn't it? The enigmatic Walkan persona." "My brand?" Walkan repeated, incredulous, anger beginning to creep into his voice. "Robert, I'm not a brand. I'm not a product on a shelf. I'm a man, an actor who's dedicated his life to the craft. And right now, I'm a guest on your program, being treated with blatant disrespect." "Oh, give me a break," Hart said, waving him off again with that same insufferable ease. "This is late-night TV, not a counseling session. People don't tune in to hear actors whine about how difficult their lives are." The comment drew murmurs of disapproval from the audience, no longer a background hum, but an audible wave. Yet Hart seemed to feed on the conflict, his energy growing with every spike in tension. "You want to talk about entertainment?" Walkan asked, and for the first time, his voice rose, cutting through the studio air like a blade. "Here's what's really entertaining, Robert. Watching a host who's so desperate to cling to relevance that he tears down his guests just to feel powerful." Hart's smirk faltered. A beat passed before it returned, but this time it had curdled into something stiff and defensive. "Whoa. That's harsh, Christopher. I'm just trying to have a little fun." "Fun?" Walkan rose slightly in his chair now, the last fragments of composure slipping. "You think this is fun? Publicly belittling someone's life's work? reducing decades of artistry to memes and mockery. I think you're being overly sensitive. Hart snapped, clearly rattled now. This is the format. It's jokes, it's jabs, it's not that deep. We don't take everything so seriously. There's a world of difference, Walkan said, voice like granite, between playful banter and calculated cruelty. What you're doing here, it isn't humor. It's humiliation. And just because it's happening in front of cameras doesn't make it acceptable. The word humiliation landed hard. Hart blinked. For a flicker of a second, the facade broke, and something real slipped through. Humiliation? He echoed, volume rising. You're accusing me of that? Christopher, that's insane. I'm a comedian. This is my job. I make things funny. If you can't deal with that, maybe you shouldn't be doing these interviews at all. Or maybe, Walkan replied with no hesitation, you shouldn't be conducting them. A good host makes their guests feel heard, draws out their story, creates a space for authenticity. You're doing the opposite. Hart was flushed now, the carefully curated charm in tatters. I've been doing this show for 2 decades, he barked. Thousands of interviews. Most of my guests get it, it's supposed to be light. But you're acting like I insulted your family. You did insult something, Walkan said, his voice low and final. You insulted my dignity, my career, and my right to be treated as a person, not a parody. The studio descended into an eerie hush, pierced only by the soft whir of the cameras and the occasional, awkward cough from the audience. Even the crew stood motionless, caught in the tension, unsure whether to step in or let the scene unfold. Donis glanced nervously around the stage, a flicker of awareness passing through his expression as he realized, perhaps too late, that he had entirely lost control. But rather than retreat or offer even the faintest apology, he lashed out with renewed venom. You want to know what I think this is really about? He sneered, voice edged with resentment. I think you're upset because, for once, someone isn't treating you like royalty. Everyone always bows and scrapes for the great Christopher Walkan, the legendary Christopher Walkan. But the moment someone looks at your career with honest eyes, you fall apart. Walkan didn't respond at first. He simply regarded Hart with a long, unreadable gaze. When he finally spoke, his tone was low and surgical. Robert, I've never asked to be placed on a pedestal. I've never demanded reverence or insulation from critique. But what you're doing here tonight, it isn't analysis. It's an attempt to tear down everything I've built. Character assassination? Hart laughed, but the sound rang hollow, strained and artificial. Come on. I'm just saying maybe you're not as profound as people think. Maybe you're just an actor who figured out that being weird gets you noticed. The air between them seemed to thicken with the weight of the accusation. Walkan's fingers, once tense on the armrests, loosened. He leaned back in his chair, studying Hart with a mixture of weariness and something resembling sorrow. You actually believe that, don't you? Walkan said quietly. You really think that everything I've done, everything I've dedicated my life to, is some elaborate performance just to be seen? Hart leaned forward as if to drive the point home. Look at the facts, Christopher. The dancing, the offbeat film roles, the poetic cadence in your speech. It's all carefully orchestrated. You're crafting this image of the eccentric genius. That's your whole thing. Walkan was silent so long that the room seemed to hold its breath. When he finally spoke, the words were soft but resonant, like the toll of a distant bell. Robert, I started dancing when I was 3. My mother put me in classes because I had too much energy, and she thought it would be good for me. Before I ever acted, I was a dancer. So when I move in films, when I use that part of myself, I'm not being strange. I'm using a skill that's been part of my life since childhood. He didn't break eye contact. And the way I speak, the timing, the pauses, the rhythm, that's not an affectation. It's the product of years spent in the theater, where language matters, where silence is as powerful as speech. It's not a gimmick. It's discipline. Hart opened his mouth, likely to interject, but Walkan raised a hand, a gentle, measured gesture that halted the moment. And those weird movies you mock? I've made over 100 films. Some were blockbusters. Some were intimate, independent projects that meant something deeply personal to me. I chose variety because I wanted to grow, to collaborate with visionary directors, to tell stories that weren't always safe. But to you, that's just me being strange for attention. The room was utterly still now, the audience transfixed. Hart's bluster had evaporated, replaced by a stunned silence. What you don't seem to grasp, Walkan continued, is that being true to yourself isn't some performance. It's not branding. And treating people with decency isn't weakness. The words landed with a quiet finality that seemed to reverberate throughout the space. Audience members sat motionless, some visibly affected by the raw dignity of the moment. But Hart, instead of absorbing what had been said, appeared to take it as a direct affront to his authority. "Oh, come off it with the sermon about authenticity," he snapped, bitterness creeping into every syllable. "You're acting like you're some noble artist, but let's be real, half the people watching this show couldn't name 3 of your movies without pulling up a search bar. You're not famous for your range. You're famous because you're weird." The insult was so jarring, so needlessly cruel, that it drew audible gasps from the crowd. Offstage, the producers were waving desperately, trying to pull Hart back from the edge. But he had already crossed the line and kept going. "And let's not forget," Hart went on, nearly shouting now, "this whole brooding intellectual shtick of yours? It was tired 20 years ago. Now it's just pathetic. You become a parody of your own myth." And then everything shifted. For the first time since the interview had begun, Walkan stood. The movement was slow, composed, yet carried with it a quiet, inarguable authority. He reached down, unclipped his microphone with care, and placed it gently on the small table beside him. "Robert," he said, voice calm as still water, "I've been in this industry long enough to tell the difference between someone having a bad night and someone who's simply not a good person. Tonight, I've learned which one you are." Hart's color drained. The bravado vanished. For the first time, he looked genuinely unsettled. "Christopher, wait, we were just messing around. You don't have to take it so seriously." But Walkan was already walking away, his stride composed, unhurried, echoing with grace. He reached the edge of the set, then turned back once more. "You want to know what's really sad, Robert?" he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent studio. "You had an opportunity tonight to have a meaningful exchange with someone who's lived a life, who could have told stories that might have amused, enlightened, even inspired. But instead, you chose to be small. You chose cruelty. And you did it because you thought it would make for better television." He shook his head, eyes full of calm disappointment. "The real tragedy isn't that you disrespected me. It's that you disgraced yourself, your platform, your team, and the people who once believed you were more than this." And with that, Christopher Walkan walked off set, not with anger, but with quiet dignity, leaving behind only the echo of what should have been. And with that, Christopher Walkan stepped off the set of the Robert Donis show, leaving behind a host lost for words, an audience stunned into silence, and a moment of live television that would echo far beyond the confines of that brightly lit studio. Hart remained seated, motionless in his chair, blinking into the hot glare of the stage lights. His mouth opened as if to speak, then closed again, no words came. He resembled a man who had just watched the floor vanish beneath his feet. At last, he managed to murmur, We'll be right back after the break." But the words barely carried past his microphone, thin and fragile. The damage, however, was done. The cameras lingered a few moments longer than they should have, capturing the full extent of Hart's unraveling, the vacant stare, the forced gulp, the realization setting in, before the feed finally cut to commercial. Yet in those final seconds of unscripted vulnerability, everything was laid bare. Here sat a man who had made his name turning interviews into entertainment, now abandoned on his own stage, left to confront the wreckage caused by his own hubris. His attempts at humor, at provocation, had pushed too far. What was meant to be playful had turned into something mean-spirited. What was intended as teasing became taunting. And in the end, the laughter he relied on had been replaced by an oppressive, almost mournful quiet. As the end credits rolled and the audience filed out, speaking in hushed tones and casting backward glances, it was painfully evident this had not simply been a late-night segment gone awry. This had been a cautionary tale, a stark lesson in how swiftly respect can be squandered and how fragile dignity becomes when mishandled in public view. Christopher Walkan had exited with grace, his composure unbroken, his integrity untouched. He had endured the prodding, the mockery, and the attempts to reduce his legacy to parody, and he had responded not with anger, but with truth, with clarity, with strength. Robert Donis, by contrast, was left to contend with the aftermath of a confrontation he had engineered but lacked the character to resolve. "So, what do you make of this extraordinary exchange?" Was Hart's conduct entirely out of bounds, or do you believe something deeper was at play beneath the surface of this heated moment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from the places where fame, ego, and authenticity collide behind the curtain of Hollywood's glittering facade.